you all know how marvelous she is. So let me just introduce someone who understands this industry, is passionate about it, and loves MPTF. So it's a great honor to introduce Delia Ephron.
I'm so excited to be here. This is my hometown, and I live in New York now, but I'm always happy to be here because it is the best hair city in the country. This morning, I'm going to talk about change, and change you want to make, change you have to make, and change that you are scared to make. And I'm just going to take you through sort of the crucial moments of my life when I've had to change direction and why and how and what I learned from it. My parents were screenwriters, a team, and my mother, she was a career woman in the 50s and 60s when there were no career women. I didn't have a friend whose mother worked, and she was fanatic about work, and she was raising 4 daughters. It was like she had this idea we were the Ephron girls, like we were like the Kennedys without the tragedy or something. And we were gonna have careers. She never mentioned anything else. She never mentioned marriage, love, anything. It was work, career. You will leave Los Angeles, because she was a New Yorker and she thought things were more serious there, and you will have a career. And the unspoken message was really that you will be writers. Dinner was probably the most important thing in making me a writer. We told our stories, we laughed. Every time I said something funny, my dad shouted, "That's a great line, write it down." And my mother had rules for everything, which I am going to share some of them with you. Don't worship celebrities. They're no better than you are. All right? I know. We weren't allowed to ask for autographs, actually, when we would go on the sets of their movies. And they wrote movies like they wrote Desk Set, they wrote No Business Like Show Business, Daddy Long Legs. So they were, you know, that was when you were on contract at the studios. And so you went to the studio and you got a weekly check. It was a very stable life, and they loved the life. I wasn't allowed to join a club or a sorority. That she felt anything that separated people like that by religion, which sororities did then, and probably still do. We weren't allowed that. You don't have to clean your plate. This was completely unheard of, I want to say, in the 50s. She had 4 daughters. This was something she said often: elope. All right? Then she said, never buy on sale. So, like, we were raised in the land of why pay less, all right? I think that this was, I think she really hated the poverty of her childhood, and when she got money, she associated it with that. Because she also said, don't eat leftovers, which is very stupid, because nothing is better than a leftover. So, but this last one is sort of my favorite. Just because you're related to someone is no reason to like them. And, you know, mothers do not often give children permission to hate them. But that's actually what she was doing. But if you're, I thought so much about this one line, because I think it encapsulates so much of what wrecks us in our lives. You know, the need to feel something you don't feel. And to punish yourself for not feeling it, when in fact your reaction to anything from happiness to death to what you feel about a close relative or your mother or your father or your child can be very complicated. And if you're thinking you don't have the right to feel it, you're going to be in terrible trouble. You know, there was a lot of burden of family expectations on me, but rather than follow the Ephron rule book, I married the first man who asked me, and I moved, well, to Providence, which isn't the backwoods, but I don't know if you've lived there. It sort of is the backwoods, all right? That's another story. Okay, so I'm living in Rhode Island at 25, and I get a job as an assistant in an office, a design office, and the boss was really mean. He was mean. he would just rag on people till they felt awful. Actually, there's a ton of people in the movie business that do that, abusive bosses, you know, and it's terrible to work for them. But he was never mean to me. And then I learned this lesson, which is that a mean boss is eventually mean to everyone. And one day, he just started beating up on me, criticizing my work, every move I made. And I stood up and I said, I quit. And he said, you're flat-chested. Okay? All right? All right, this is my favorite thing that's ever happened to me because I love to tell this story so much. But, and my lifelong regret, if there is one, is really that I didn't have a comeback. And I was really good with comebacks. I've spent a lifetime thinking of all the things I could have said. Anyway, so I decided to go into the crocheting business, right? This does not make a lot of sense, right? But I do. And my girlfriend and I start crocheting purses and belts. We get like an order from Barney's for 50 purses and belts in like 3 days or something. So very quickly, this stopped working, obviously. I was in New York and I was at a party and I went up to an editor from Simon & Schuster and I said, I know you'd never be interested in this. This is, by the way, not the way to present yourself, okay? I know you'd never be interested in this, but would you like a book about crocheting? This is a guy I'm saying this. He says yes. So now I'm writing this book about crocheting, which is just instructions. I'm not a writer. I'm just writing instructions about how you make purses and belts and sweaters. And suddenly, I'm also 27 or 8. And it is dawning on me for the first time in my life that I actually have one life, and I'm messing it up. I'm writing these directions, and I'm thinking, I think I want to be a writer. And I said those words to him, and I just want to say, you know, when you have a dream at any age and you speak it aloud, it's a really big deal. I mean, you are actually letting the world know what your secret is, and then you create a commitment in you to follow through. So it was a huge moment. And he said, this is my first husband, that's an important part of this story, okay. He said, I don't want you to be a writer. And I said, why? And he said, suppose you become famous. I don't want you to become famous. Okay? So, I mean, obviously I had to leave him. But I say this as a joke, but the truth is, if someone wants to crush your dreams with his big fat foot or her big fat foot, you have to get that person out of your life. Period. I don't care who they are. We talk a lot about abuse of the physical nature and how awful it is in this country, but that is a form of abuse. I am not a logical person particularly. My work kind of comes in fantasies and crazy ideas, but there was something about the largeness of this that made me think practically. And I looked at it and I thought, I've got to be published in the New York Times. And I was down to $300, which would have been $500 if I hadn't fallen in love with an orange coat. And I'm sitting at home and I'm eating chocolate pudding, all right? And it was that kind that you cook that has a little skin on the top, you know? So I'm making a little hole in the top the way I did when I was 5, and I'm scooping the pudding out from underneath, and then I'm saving the skin for last, okay? And I suddenly look, I'm eating like a child. So I wrote a deadpan description in instructions, because I knew how to write instructions. I had been a crochet writer, right? About how children eat food. And I gave it to someone I had met who was a cartoonist at the New Yorker. He lived near us in Rhode Island. I gave it to Edward Corrin, and he gave it to the New York Times. And I sold it, and it ran on the back page of the magazine, the Sunday magazine. And I was a writer overnight. It was the magic thing that you just get lucky. And then, of course, I had no work habits or discipline. And the truth is you can't do anything in life without work habits and discipline. You just cannot. It's not magic. You have to sit down in the morning for 2 hours at your desk. You cannot get up till noon, 10 to 12. You can't make tea, you can't feed your plants or your pet or anything. You cannot move from the chair. And of course, I didn't have email then, so I was extremely lucky. And then he said, do it from 2 to 4. And I literally taught myself work habits. I just glued myself to the chair. I glued myself in the afternoon. And by the time I was done and had written this book, I now sort of habit turned into love over time. My sister Nora decided to be a director. And she had written that amazing movie, When Harry Met Sally, and she was the toast of LA. And as a result, she got to direct a movie. And she did not want to do this alone. She needed a collaborator, and she found a piece of material that Meg Wolitzer book called This Is Your Life, which we changed to This Is My Life. And she said, you've got to do this with me. She said, you know, we share half a brain anyway. You've got to do this. I want to talk about collaboration. In this book I wrote, Sister, Mother, Husband, Dog, which I wrote after Nora died, I wrote a lot about collaboration because I think when you get to a crossroads in life, you think, okay, I'm going to do something, and I bet I need a partner because I'm a little bit scared to do it by myself. And the thing about collaboration is it is fantastic because both the success and the blows two people are experiencing together, and that is really a phenomenally great thing. But it's much more complicated than that, because if you don't laugh at the same things, and if you don't like the same things, you can't collaborate with someone. And I think if you don't have the same attitudes toward money, you can't collaborate, oddly enough. I think that's a really important indicator in even in marriage, of whether you're going to get along. Collaboration really doesn't work if it's really personal to one person, because you need to control the stories that are, and the activities and the businesses and whatever that are so personal, so dear to your heart. Sometimes you simply cannot collaborate. And the other thing, which I'm sure is true of all other ventures too, but if you're working on something which you are so intimate about, you need to be alone to access the real intimacy of the feelings. And collaboration happens in a room. Everybody's talking, and there's coffee, and there's kind of, you know, the phone rings, and you're thinking about lunch, and somebody's looking over your shoulder, no, I don't like that, or, you know, there's a way that you want it to be your story, and it can't be if you collaborate. So there are simply things in life that are not suited to collaboration. So in a way, friendship is a collaboration on life, right? And marriage is a collaboration on raising children. So collaboration becomes this thing which we better be good at it, but we better figure out when it works and when it doesn't work. I always make a joke that if you're a screenwriter, you know, at some point in life you decide you're either going to be a director or you're going to be angry. And for me, it was you're going to be a director, you're going to be a novelist, or you're going to be angry. All these thoughts I've had that I'm talking to you about came out of this journey I took when I wrote this book. And I started writing it because when Nora died, it was the most unthinkable thing that could ever happen to me. There was a way that I was just lost. And I went into my office at 4 every day, and I would write about us and what it meant to be sisters and to lose her and to have to keep it a secret all that time, which was so painful. And, you know, she meant so much to so many people, and it was so hard for me to find myself in a public grief when my grief was so completely private. So I was leaving the house, and I would just get blindsided by somebody coming up to me because she's so beloved, you know? And it was so hard to negotiate my own grief and the grief, other people's grief. And so I started to, writing is where you process everything. And so I started this journey of writing about this, and that led to writing about my 20s and 7 brides and all that stuff, and my dog. And I just want to say, if there are any step-parents here, get yourself a dog. Because there better be someone in the house that loves you, okay? All right. That's the biggest takeaway I have today. The last thing I want to talk about is, I did not know where this book was going to lead, and I ended up writing about my mother. And when I was 11, my mother became an alcoholic. And she became an absolutely terrifying person. She was very pulled together, wore these perfect little suits in the day, never lost her temper, full of her little sayings. And at night, she became a raging, terrifying person, like the woman in the attic in Jane Eyre. When you're a child in an unsafe home, you are anxious all the time. You are trying to prevent catastrophe. And even when you get out of that house, you are trained now to prevent catastrophe, which, by the way, you can't do. And you worry all the time because you were in a home where you worried. So an empty space, a possibility of an empty space means I fill it with worry, whereas someone else might fill it with something else. And worrying is, to say the least, negative goal setting, and it is also a waste of energy. I was turned into a watcher. That's what I call it when you grow up in an alcoholic family, or your parent is manic or crazy, or anything that you're dealing with where you're the adult. When no one's taking care of you, you're taking care of other people. And you take that into adulthood, and I feel like it's my final karmic task, you know, to somehow shed this level of anxiety at a point in my life when everything is actually more terrifying. I think change is very hard when you come from a family where you feel unsafe, because it requires so much bravery. And the only times I regret is the moments I wasn't brave. So I just want to say that sometimes you have to get in the cage with the lion, and sometimes you have to roar. And you have to find the nerve to do that no matter what your life was up to that time. And that's really what I want you to take away from this talk. And thank you for having me.